Good evening, everyone. Gordon Causey, as always, coming live and unscripted. This is now the sixth day, Wednesday of March, Wednesday, the 6th of March. The time is 10:53 p.m., so a little later than I'd like to start, but better late than never. Let's find Candy. She's expecting this. All right, lay down. Speak. Give me a good one. Speak. Speak. Good. Come on up. There. Now she's got what she wants. You can listen to her munch away. Going to be talking tonight. This is what I'm doing now regular on Wednesdays and Sunday nights. I'm talking about current events and things that are on my mind a little more. I go a little more in depth on Wednesdays and Sundays. Other times I'm telling jokes mostly, and I will have more for other nights of the week. But I've titled this one something to the effect of, what is so significant, what is so important about the land of Israel or Palestine, or call it the Levant, call it the Holy Land, call it the Promised Land. There are all kinds of different names. I have my Bible in front of me, and I'm going to be making reference to that. But I don't think there's any question that this piece of real estate, again, call it Israel, call it Palestine, call it the Levant, Holy Land, Promised Land, land of milk and honey. I want to go right back to the beginning. I want to go right back into the book of Genesis when Abraham was called out by God and told to leave the land of the Chaldeans, city of Ur, and he went to Haran, and then he made his way down, Haran being somewhere in what is now modern-day Turkey, and then he made his way down into the land of Canaan. There's another name for it, the land of Canaan, inhabited by the Canaanites, and it was peopled by the Hittites, by the Perizzites, by the thisites and the thatites, just generally speaking, the Canaanites. And Abraham went down there, and he occupied the land, and God promised it to Abraham and his descendants as a perpetual inheritance. However, what's interesting is it's the land of milk and honey. That's another moniker that's often thrown onto the Holy Land. However, during Abraham's time there was a famine, and he had to go and sojourn and spend time in Egypt. But he then came back. Eventually, his wife Sarai, later called Sarah, would bear him a son named Isaac. Isaac, likewise, another famine came into the land, and he had to leave and go into the land of the Philistines, which curiously, the Philistines were from what is now Gaza. That was the land of the Philistines. And it's actually from the word Philistine that we get the modern term Palestine. It was a name that was affixed to, there's so much history here. It was the Romans under the Emperor Hadrian who renamed their former territory, their former holding of Judea or Judah. They renamed it Palestina. And what Hadrian was doing was he was reaching back into Jewish antiquity, and the Philistines were the natural enemies of the Israelites. And so he renamed the territory Palestina, and it's a name that stuck even into the present day. We render it in English as Palestina has been rendered in English into Palestine. But anyway, so we have Abraham was there, had to leave, he came back. Isaac was there, he had to leave, go to the land of the Philistines, and then he came back. And then Jacob was born to Isaac. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, bore twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau being the elder, the first to break the womb was Esau. However, God favored Jacob, and Jacob was eventually renamed Israel. That's where we get the word Israel from. And then Israel, or Jacob. Jacob had a son named Joseph who was sold into slavery, and he went and he was sold into slavery in Egypt. And eventually a great famine came over all the land, including the land of Canaan, or call it whatever you want. And so what happened was Israel and his sons, Jacob and his sons, joined with Joseph. I'm skipping over a lot of the biblical history. I'm going to assume many will be familiar. If you're not, it's in the book of Genesis. Toward the end, when you want to get to the Joseph story about how he was sold into slavery and prophesied that there would be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. So with under Joseph's guidance, the Egyptians stored up huge amounts of food during the 7 years of plenty. And then when the 7 years of famine came, Jacob sent his sons to get food in Egypt. And eventually, skipping ahead, Jacob and his sons all moved to Egypt, and they were given territory in the land of Goshen for farming, because the Israelites, the Hebrews, were keepers of cattle and farmers. And that in Egyptian society put them at the lowest rung. They were basically one step above being slaves. And then later, after Joseph had died and his memory had kind of faded from Egyptian memory, then the Hebrews were actually enslaved for about 430 years. And then we come to the story of Moses and the plagues on Egypt. And then Moses leads the Hebrew people out of bondage, out of slavery. They go to the mountain of God. I think it's at Horeb. And they're delivered the Ten Commandments, but the Hebrew people are a stiff-necked, rebellious people who don't listen to God. And so as a result, rather than being taken to the land of promise, they sojourn, they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And then after that 40 years, after Moses dies, then Joshua leads them back into the land of Canaan, the land where Abraham had been, the land where Isaac had been, the land where Jacob had come from, and then moved into the land of Goshen in Egypt. What's interesting to me is each time they're coming back to this same piece of real estate, the same land of Canaan. Sheriff of YouTube is saying, I love the story of Mesopotamia. When Abraham came, Mesopotamia is often called the cradle of civilization. It's the land between the Tigris and Euphrates River, incredibly fertile. And this is one of the things I find curious, is that the Mesopotamian basin, if you will, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, that was considered, that was very fertile land. Certainly the Nile Delta in this land of Goshen was another fertile land. And we have the chosen land, the promised land, the land of milk and honey, going back to the earliest biblical accounts. During Abraham's time, there's a famine. During Isaac's time, there's a famine. During Jacob's time, there is a famine. So what is so significant about this territory? I think it's a reasonable question to ask, and I don't think it's heretical in any way. But I mean, if God was going to have a chosen land, why wouldn't it be the Napa Valley in California, or the Rhineland in Europe, or between the Tigris and the Euphrates, or the Nile Delta? There are certainly more fertile pieces of real estate on the planet than the land of Canaan. But regardless, that is to where they keep coming back. Abraham leaves, comes back. Isaac leaves, comes back. Jacob goes and eventually dies. But after he dies, they go back and they bury him in the land of Canaan. But his descendants, his sons, who would later become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel, you had Gad and the Gadites, Benjamin and the Benjamites, Dan and the Danites, Judah and the Judahites, etc., etc. There were 12 of them. So then Joshua conquers the land of Canaan, and eventually the kingdom of Israel is set up. And it's a unified kingdom right up until Solomon. And then after Solomon, the kingdom divides in two, and there's the northern kingdom, which retains the name Israel, and the southern kingdom, which is Judah. And it is the northern kingdom of Israel that is first conquered by the Assyrians. And this is from where we get the 10 lost tribes of Israel, because the northern kingdom of Israel comprised 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom of Judah only comprised 2. The 2 in the southern kingdom were Judah and Benjamin, or the Judahites and the Benjamites. And after Assyria conquered the northern kingdom, again, this is where we have the 10 lost tribes from. They were scattered. However, some of the peoples of the northern kingdom of Israel made their way south. And it's from it's from Judah that that got rendered into English. We say Jew, Jewish. It comes from Judah or Judea, rather than saying Judahite or Judean. It got shortened eventually to Jew. And then the southern kingdom, eventually it too was conquered, this time by Babylon. And there was the Babylonian exile. And a lot of the Judeans or Judahites or Jews, they were exiled to Babylon. And then the Babylonian Empire fell to the Persians under King Cyrus, and then the Jews were released from their captivity. And yet again, they return to Jerusalem, to the land of Judah, to what was formerly known as Canaan. They come back to this land. They don't go to Goshen. They don't go for the Mesopotamian Valley. They don't build ships and sail across the Atlantic to go and across the North American continent to go to the Napa Valley. Again, it's this land of promise, this land of milk and honey, which so often is not the land of milk and honey. It's has at times been a very barren and harsh land, and yet it is the chosen land. It is the apple of God's eye. And you'd have to wonder, at least the thought has occurred to me, and I'm sure it's occurred to others as well, is what is so special about this particular piece of real estate? And there's one thing I keep coming back to that in thinking and pondering and praying over this and ruminating over it, I know that the Dead Sea, the shores of the Dead Sea, that is the lowest point below sea level on Earth. And I think that is significant. I think because if we go into more modern times, gentlemen like Mark Twain, and which is going back into the 1800s, 1840s, 50s, 60s, somewhere around there. Mark Twain traveled to the Holy Land. He chronicled his visit to the Holy Lands in a book called An Innocent Abroad or The Innocents Abroad. I don't know whether it was singular or plural. Doesn't matter. You can look it up. And he described it as a barren, unpopulated wasteland, devoid of people. Mostly, you could travel for hundreds of miles and not see anyone, or you'd see the odd nomad, and that even cactus and another type of plant which love barren soil, even they were hard to find. And it's been like that for much of its history. And yet it's a very contentious piece of real estate. The Assyrians conquered, the Babylonians conquered it, the Persians conquered it, the Greeks conquered it, the Romans conquered it, the Arabians conquered it, the Egyptians, the Mamluks conquered it, conquered. And geographically, it's significant because Israel is on the Asian continent. However, it's basically the nexus of three continents. It's the nexus of Asia, Africa, and Europe. It's almost like a linchpin of the three. And again, when you look at the city of Jerusalem, which is often referred to as Zion, and this is from where we get the term Zionist or Zionism, Jerusalem is right next door to the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point on earth. And I wanted to reference a couple passages in the Bible that I think may be significant. I'm going to preface this by saying there are individuals, religious individuals, spiritual individuals, who will tell you that when it comes to the Bible, they know it all, and they have the answers, and they have the keys to the kingdom. And I'm always leery. I'm always cautious around those types of individuals because I don't think it's always that clear cut. I think it's part of our fallen human nature. We want to know the answers, the truth, and we want it fast and we want it easy. And so I think that explains part of the reason why some people will assert full and assured knowledge of exactly what the Bible says and means. And I also know that in terms of, for those who aspire toward being a spiritual leader, a religious leader, that it's easier to garner a following if you speak with assurance, as opposed to, you know what? There are different ways to look at this. The individual says there are different ways to look at this, I think, will garner less of a following than the one who says, I know all the answers. I think it's okay not to have all the answers, to have questions. But anyway, getting on to, if you go to Revelation in chapter 16, at the beginning of the chapter, it says, and I heard, this is John's revelation. He's on the island of Patmos, and he's having a vision. And part of the vision, he says, then I heard a loud voice from the temple in the heavens, the New Jerusalem, telling the seven angels, go and pour out on the earth the seven bowls of the wrath of God. If you know the battle hymn of the Republic, glory, glory, hallelujah, his truth is marching on. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. That's where that reference comes from. Go and pour out on the earth the seven bowls of the wrath of God. And if you go down to verse 12 of chapter 16, it says, the sixth angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And interestingly, if you read the news, you'll know that the Euphrates River is drying up. Of course, it's being blamed on climate change, but another reason it's drying up is because in Turkey, they are restricting flow. They have created dams and other such machinations to control the water flow in the Euphrates, and the simple fact of the matter is the Euphrates River is drying up. And if we go to chapter 9 of the same book of Revelation, another passage, 9, chapter 13, it says, "Then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." That's as much as I want to read from the Bible. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. I think there's something significant about Jerusalem in particular being basically right next to the very lowest point on the face of the planet Earth. Of all the landmass on the Earth, the Mariana Trench, of course, is lower, but that's at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. In terms of on land, you don't get any lower than the Dead Sea. And I think that's significant because we know precious little about what lies beneath our feet. We know more about the sky above than we know about what lies beneath our feet. Russia, a number of years ago, I don't know how long ago it was, dug what is to date, I think, still the deepest hole. They dug the furthest down toward the Earth's crust. And they dug somewhere in around 40,000 feet. Interestingly, we have planes that travel at 40, and even there are some planes that are capable of traveling at 50,000 feet. So we regularly go higher up in the air than we have ever been. We know less about the ground underneath our own feet. There's another hole being dug in a desert in China, and they are endeavoring to dig another super hole like that. And proof that we know so little about what exists under our very feet is the fact that when that Russian hole was dug, and you can look into this, just type in deepest hole ever dug and you can find out the information on it. When they dug into it, they encountered temperatures hotter than what they were anticipating. And the reason they had to stop at 40-odd thousand feet was because they couldn't dig anymore because the heat was simply far too hot. Their equipment wouldn't work. I believe the drill bits and such were melting. And that was much hotter than they had anticipated. Will things be different now with the Chinese digging? I read that about the Chinese endeavor. I don't know if it started yet. There was an article on it published within the last year. So sometime in 2023, they were going to endeavor to dig deep down into the earth. But this brings us back to something that in religious circles is referred to as either supersessionism or replacement theology. And it's popular with a lot of Christians today to view Israel, the land of Israel today, call it Palestine again, call it Canaan, call it the Levant, call it the Promised Land, stick whatever label you want on it. But there's a tendency among many today, especially Christians, to say, well, in God's eyes, and this is again mounting our humanistic throne and proclaiming that we know the mind of God, that the land of Israel is no more significant than any other piece of real estate, and that there is no longer a chosen people of God. All who accept Christ, but it doesn't matter. There's no more chosen people. And I lean toward, I don't have definitive answers, but I lean toward believing that the land of Israel, what is the modern nation state of Israel today, that it still holds incredible spiritual significance, and that the Jewish people people living in it, not just the people living in Israel, but Jewish people in general, also have a significant role to play in the history that is to come. That some will say that history is prophecy confirmed, and that prophecy is history foretold. I do believe that the Bible is a reliable source for prophecy, but understanding it is another matter. What are these seven bowls of God's wrath? What will it mean? These beasts that are chained beneath the Euphrates River, are they physical? Are they spiritual? Talk about killing a third of mankind, which I think now when we tie into what's going on with the whole COVID agenda, and with, I don't know how many billions of people on this planet have rolled up their sleeve and taken that mRNA shot, and we have no idea what the long-term safety ramifications are of it. And I think we're seeing that play out now. All kinds of circulatory, heart-related, brain-related issues have been recently identified. So that's basically, I'd be interested in the thoughts of others, what this significance of Zion is. I did have a talk at one point, another podcast I was on, with a gentleman by the name of George Antonios, who's actually, I believe he was born in Lebanon. He's a Baptist pastor in Montreal, Canada, Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And he speaks multiple languages. He speaks English, French, Lebanese, Arabic. It's from him that I found out that Lebanese is actually simply a dialect of Arabic. And he can also get by in a few other languages as well. Incredibly smart gentleman. And he posited to me that, as a possibility, that Zion is the hill from which Lucifer, Satan, the devil, was cast down from. And hence the significance of it. And then he also equally talked about it as potentially the site of the Garden of Eden, which doesn't entirely line up with the biblical account in terms of how we view geography today, east of Eden and everything like that. It doesn't quite line up. However, we have to remember that the flood, when the flood happened, and which is something I do believe happened. I do believe that there was a great cataclysm, a great flood, deluge, stick whatever label on it you want. I have Sheriff of YouTube saying, feels right to be a pureblood. Sheriff of YouTube did not take the jabs like myself, well, in Canada, millions of us. I think my guess would be 3 to 4 million Canadians were smart enough to see through all the lies and deceptions of the COVID era and to say no. And I think, without question, we have been entirely vindicated in our decision. And I'm quite equally certain that there are absolutely millions of more Canadians, the majority of Canadians who got the shots, now regret that decision and wish they had not, especially given that just about everyone I know who got the shot still got sick with COVID anyway. So the immunization that doesn't immunize. But there's so much going on in the world right now. COVID's just a part of it, and disease. And it strikes me now that with measles outbreaks being reported, that they're hell-bent on pushing more inoculations. The human immune system, the God-given human immune system, has become something of a conspiracy theory. But I'm going to end it off there. I'm going to keep it about 30 minutes in length. I know this wasn't the greatest topic of conversation because it's kind of going all over the place, but it is what it is. I won't be I'm going to return to jokes on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Over the next 3 days, I've got more jokes to tell, Russian jokes, a couple World War I jokes. I'll see if I can dig out or can adapt or repurpose another joke to make it about Justin Trudeau. I love doing that. And I'll thank everyone for commenting. Thank you, Sheriff of YouTube, for chiming in on this boring podcast. I guess that's what I'll call it, miserable and pathetic as it is. But to everyone who has liked and subscribed to my channel, thank you very much. I'm pushing now. It's unreal how high it's going. And as I say, I will be doing jokes from time to time, but on Wednesdays and Sundays, I'll talk more about the news of the day, current events, things that are happening. And with what's going on in Israel right now, which is heartbreaking, I'll just throw one last little thing in. What's amazing to me is the fact that in Yemen, there has been a 10-year civil war going on in that country. And during this civil war, over 250,000, over 250,000 children under the age of 5 have been killed, either in the fighting, but many also due to starvation or lack of access to even the most basic of medical care. And no one talks about it. No one cares about it. And the reason no one cares about what's going on in Yemen, and 250,000 little tiny children, 5 years and under, why they can be killed and no one cares, is because the television didn't program the mindless horde out there to worry about it. Everyone's been programmed to care about what's going on in Gaza. And it's fair enough. What's happening in Gaza is absolutely brutal. And I am decidedly a supporter of the people of Israel, not necessarily the government, but certainly the people of Israel. I believe in Israel's right to exist. I do not believe that they should be wiped out from the river to the sea, as so many seem to want. So many say from the river to the sea, they want Israel wiped off the map. I'm not in that camp. I support the people of Israel. Again, not necessarily its government, but even with my support of Israel, what really bothered me recently, the aid trucks came in with food aid. I think they had flour, and the people of Gaza stormed the trucks looking to unload and get their hands on some of this flour. And the IDF, apparently, reportedly, multiple sources, opened fire on them. And that, to me, there needs to be a war crime investigation on that. Was that directed from higher ups? Was that individuals on the ground acting on their own? Whatever the case, needs to be investigated, and people need to be held to account, either senior people or those on the ground if they were acting autonomously. It was heinous. Sheriff of YouTube enjoyed the topic tonight, not boring at all. I'm glad, but anyway, appreciate it again. And as always, if you want to subscribe to the channel, you're most welcome. I think Sheriff of YouTube already is. God bless, and we'll talk to you later. Good night now.